Hey everyone, this is Dan, and this is a little weekend rant that I decided to put together here. Uh, Throughout the sort of history of my channel, I've kind of skirted making any kind of major statements or stands. Most people who watch my videos or have been watching my videos know I do both old comics, new comics, manga, BDs, which are French comics, also 2000 AD stuff, but I also do a lot of Comicsgate books. And most people who follow me know that I like a lot of the Comicsgate creators and books. That being said, I've never really kind of taken a stand as far as whether or not I'm Comicsgate. There was a time when I thought pretty much I was, and I think honestly, I kind of am in the position, or I guess the same opinion as your boy Zach, Richard C. Meyer, and just some guy in that Comicsgate actually really isn't a group. It's more of an idea. And you don't really join it. It's more like you get kind of thrown in it because your ideas line up with the ideas of, the label. And the ideas that I have always thought it meant, and at least these are my ideas, so maybe I'm wrong, is that it's about customer service. It's about respecting your customer and listening to them and trying to deliver the best kind of entertainment, regardless of people's backgrounds, politics, origins, sex, race, whatever. It's just entertainment as it was, essentially 10, 20, 30 years ago. That's how it was in the 90s. That's how it was in the early 2000s. For a short period in the tens, it was like that. And I think ever since really 2015, 2014, things have started turning. It really went into hyperdrive in 2016. And now we're kind of at this point where you have this incredible division, and you have just an unfortunately significant group of people that feel the need that anything that is not their view, that is not their opinion or part of their group, has to be censored. It has to be crushed. It has to be destroyed. It has to be, the popular term of today, canceled, right? And it's very fear-based when I kind of listen in on these people or read their thoughts. And it's also very dominant on Twitter, to be honest. I did have a Twitter for a short amount of time. I ended up deleting it just because I couldn't stand the platform. It just drives me nuts. Even Minds, to a degree, I can't really stand. And I'm not going to jump on Parler either. It's just not my thing. I don't really care. I just don't like the nature of that. And I think years from now, there'll probably be many psychology papers written on the negative effects of social media on humanity and I think personal, mental health, right? That's just my theory. But I wanted to talk about there's been a lot of recent stuff going on regarding the comic book industry, mainly the sense that the industry is not doing too hot. COVID-19's kind of done a serious number on both shops and distribution and publishers. And the hot thing right now is really crowdfunding. Even the mainstream pros are moving more and more into crowdfunding. And it's not hard to see why. It's a very flexible platform. It allows you to really tailor your production to what the demand is, rather than taking a guess at what your demand is and trying to produce to meet it. It's really nice. It basically takes the risk out of your business venture, right? If you're going out to try to make a comic, if you crowdfund, you know exactly how many people, are your customers, how much you need to make, and you can really specify your production, right, to that. Not to get too technical or businessy about it, but the early, days of crowdfunding had some pretty interesting comics. Obviously, Kickstarter had some rather crazy collected webcomic runs, such as Order of the Stick in the early tens, and then believe really the great innovator was Brian Pulido for a while with Lady Death, and then came Comicsgate. Originally, Comicsgate was, according to what I've read, because I never really jumped on the early Comicsgate days like Captain Cummings. I wasn't really a big fan of Captain Cummings. His videos just weren't that interesting to me. But I was a big fan, and people who follow the channel, I'm still a big fan of Richard C. Meyer's original Diversity in Comics channel. I still like Comics Matters too, though I don't watch nearly as many of his videos as I did when he was doing Diversity in Comics back in 2018, early 2019. But Comicsgate really grew out of these YouTube channels that basically reviewed a lot of new comics and found them very wanting. Anyone who's kind of been paying attention, to any reviews on new comic channels that aren't shill reviews, essentially, it's not hard to see why. They're really bad. They're very bad for the most part. And it's really funny to me. You'll notice there's a lot of channels that get a lot of views that are just sort of the video quality is really great, and they kind of go over overviews, and usually it's kind of a compilation of what the storyline is. It's a great those videos are great if you want to learn about a comic book story without spending the money on the comic, and you just want to be in the in crowd, right? But if you actually wanted to read the comic book yourself, those videos are pretty worthless because they don't really tell you whether the run is good or not. They just tell you what happened. The reason why Comicsgate grew so well is because people throughout YouTube were looking for channels that would actually review books and let you know whether they were actually good or not. Kind of what reviews are supposed to be, right? A lot of the higher end older comic book channels were basically just either here's an info dump for those of you who don't want to buy or spend money on comics, or here's a shill review so I get goodies from Marvel or DC. And Comicsgate kind of jumped around that, and honestly they never called themselves Comicsgate. That was actually a term applied to them by the major publishers, and really the writers and mainstream comic book pros applied that term to them in a way to sort of degrade their opinion, because it was kind of like around that was around the time when Gamergate basically fell apart and failed. And Gamergate, to me, I remember when it first started, I was never really into it because it seemed kind of weird to me. I didn't know what exactly we were going to do to these video game companies or these video game websites that we didn't like their practices, other than not buy their video games, but people still bought their video games. So it was like, okay, what was the purpose of this? Comicsgate, ironically, even though the term was created by those who were opposed to the YouTube channels that criticized modern comics, it ended up being a rallying cry for those channels and really all of their viewers, because it's not really about the channels. It's really about the hundreds of thousands of customers that are just either left and gave up on comics, or were disappointed in modern day comics and wanted comics to go back to what it was. And for a while, for a couple of years, that was kind of the focus of the Comicsgate group, was about changing the narrative, right? And trying to convince Marvel and DC and all the other comic book publishers to go back to formula, to go back to what worked, right? Unfortunately, it didn't really work. They would have little runs here and there, but for the most part, sort of all of the things that I complain about: decompressed storytelling, poor art, terrible writing, very, very poor editing, and just massive amounts of political propaganda shoved into the stories. They just didn't go away. They stuck with it. And for the most part, Marvel, DC, all these companies, IDW, Dark Horse, they didn't care. As far as they were concerned, they had found a niche in usually being subsidized by larger companies like Warner Brothers and Disney, or providing, captive audiences such as Scholastic sales. They knew that they didn't really need the old comic book customers. So around that time, and in addition, a lot of the cancel culture and, I hate to repeat it, but it is apt, social justice warrior issues began creeping into the comic book industry, the professional industry, and people were getting ostracized for their own political views. This is when Ethan Van Sciver showed up. I remember his YouTube channel was mainly like drawing stuff and doing like interviews with pros and stuff. And then all of a sudden he was, canceled or removed from DC Comics. He said he left, but, I think Well, actually, he kind of knew that things were going downhill, and that's when Comic Artist Pro Secrets, the channel, became something completely different. And then Comicsgate went into overdrive, and there's a lot of debate about whether that was the right direction for the so-called movement. I kind of find it funny. I don't really think it's a movement because it was just a label created by professionals in the comic book industry to sort of downplay or discredit, the views. But essentially, Ethan Van Sciver, Richard C. Meyer, John Malin, and many of the other earlier groups, they were the first ones to jump onto Indiegogo and create, or generate crazy, crazy money on that platform. And to this day, they're still generating crazy money. For the most part, even though Richard C. Meyer never really matched his success on Jawbreakers 1, on Jawbreakers 2 and 3, and many of his other books, he maintains a pretty consistent amount of money. Generally, his Jawbreakers books make about between 150 and 250K. It seems like seems to be his range. And then Iron Sights is usually just at six figures, and his smaller books tend to be around 50K to 70K. That seems to be the case. He also had the Expendables book, which really should have done better, but again, about $250,000 book for the most part. But yeah, the interesting thing about it is that they were ostracized from the industry. They were kind of like not allowed to join, not allowed to do anything. That's why Richard C. Myers has a lawsuit with Mark Waid over, Mark Waid tortiously interfering, allegedly, his ability to put Jawbreakers, his first book, in stores. And it's kind of amazing to kind of follow the story of this, group, essentially a group of people, right? It's not just creators, it's, customers. Honestly, it's hilarious. Every time you kind of try to catch up with what's going on, there's so much new stuff. There's people making cartoons, people making video games, people making music, and we're still kind of early on. The current movement, which really kind of blew up with Richard C. Meyer and Ethan Van Sciver creating comic books, started more around late 2018. And if you think about it, 2 years later, it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can see that something is working because those that would be competing begin to actively really speak out and attack it. And you can see here, there's all kinds of stuff. The pros are going after it. The Dynamite Comics was working with some CG creators, and pros attack them to shut it down. There's a bunch of pros attacking any artists that dare to work with Comicsgate. There's people basically spreading a lie that they're a hate group. Honestly, from what I've seen of the streams, it's not a hate group at all. It's not even honest. It's not even like a political group, because there's a lot of people that are not. They're not politically tied to anything. They're not conservative or liberal or whatever you call it. They're just comic book fans that want to have good comic books. And it's been amazing to kind of sit and watch this go over the last couple of years. In the beginning, I was like everyone. I just kind of picked up some YouTube channels when I was going at it. This Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite Cringe series that I'm doing is actually the source of what got me back into watching, or actually really going back to comics. I originally read a lot of comics when I was little, but it was mainly Archie comics because that was all that was available at the supermarket when I was growing up. And then I never really got back into it till I was playing a lot of Capcom fighting games, and I was picking up Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, which was kind of a disappointing game, and I had kind of picked up these comic books just for fun because they were the collector's edition. I was like, I've never read a Marvel comic book in a long time, and when I read through these ones, this was 2017, 2018 Marvel, by the way, they were all awful. They were terrible, and I was like blown away. I was like, what in the world? Like, I almost felt like I had lost money because here I was grabbing all these collector books. I thought, they're probably pretty good stories to get people that were into video games into buying the comics. No, they're all terrible. Every single one of these books in this Marvel vs. Capcom variant cover collection is terrible. And I ended up at that point being like, man, I wonder what other people thought of it. And I ended up on YouTube, and that's when I discovered Diversity in Comics, and that's when all of this kind of went off on a on a rocket at that point. And what I find really depressing about all of this is that, you know, the pros, in their attempt to basically, you know, protect themselves, have turned it into a war when it really didn't need to be a war. I think the amount of people that actually are, you know, supposedly, you know, theoretically racist or sexist or bigoted is like, you could probably put them all in one house, the number of people in the whole world that are like that way for comics, right? That are reading comics. What it really is it's all of the old school fans, the people that grew up reading the stuff since the 80s or the 90s. And again, as I've been kind of reviewing 80s Marvel comics and DC comics, there's literally nothing racist or bigoted or sexist about those comics in that era. They were like well ahead of their time in terms of progressive views and what was considered, you know, the norm of the time, right? And I just find this whole statement, Comicsgate is a hate group, is just completely wrong, and it annoys me because to me, I like read everything, right? I read manga, I read American comics, I read Beidays and all the rest. And I find, in terms of freedom of expression and the beauty of the stories, the Japanese and the French are so far ahead of us. It's not even funny. And it's because, ironically enough, you know, considering that, you know, this is so-called America, land of the free, they are more free to express, you know, and tell their stories than we are, which is crazy if you think about it. Just absolutely crazy. It's amazing to think about what was, you know, the counterculture of the 90s and the early 2000s, what was cool and hip, is now completely censored and considered, you know, hate speech. It's unbelievable, but I guess it's the times that we're living in. Anyhow, I'm going to shut this rant off. I don't want to rant forever here. It's not really my jive on my channel, but I had to get this off my chest. It was kind of annoying me just reading news and talking about this stuff. Anyhow, that's the video. If you liked it, please hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. If you got any comments about this vid, or I guess the state of comics in general nowadays, leave it down below, and I will see you next time.